Yeah.
Hello. Hi. Hi everyone, my name is Pranali. I am an honors program advisor here. I'm a graduate assistant at UNC, and I'm really excited that we're back for another semester of TEDish Talks. And this is one of my favorite events because like we have you all, like the honors community, people from the honors community come up to talk about whatever excites them, they're passionate about, they want to talk with others about. And so this is really exciting that we're doing it again. And then we have an incredible lineup of speakers. So without much ado, I want to introduce and bring on stage Loree. As you've probably seen her in lots of different spaces, she is the Executive Director of Undergraduate Academic Engagement and the Director of Honors Program. She is going to talk about a talk titled Big Dreams, Small Steps.
Okay, so you probably think that I'm going to talk about how if you have big dreams, you just have to take small steps, like up that ladder, to get to your dream, right? Well, I'm not. Why? Because that would be a lie. Actually, if you have big dreams, it looks more like this. You have to take big steps sometimes, with lots of obstacles, lots of failures, and self-doubt, risky ventures, and then things start to work out. You work your way through the thunderstorms, through the hail, you go around the obstacles, you jump the chasms, right? You go through the unknowns to get to where you're going. Do you think these are just platitudes? Maybe, but I have a couple of examples today, a couple of we'll call them case studies, to show you how I've been tied to some individuals that have used this path to get to their big dreams. So, back in 1991, I was a college student, like many of you. That was me. I worked for the Associated Students, I was in student government, I worked for the office, and I had a mentor at that time. That was him. And he became a pretty close mentor because I worked so much, I did lots of different projects. So he's even the one that 15 years later, I asked to write me a letter of recommendation for graduate school. But this isn't about him. Instead, this is about his son. So his son attended a nearby junior college. He was 1 year younger than me. He'd stop by the office. I got to know him a little bit. He was originally going to be a police officer, and then he discovered theater. He did his first production as the Scarecrow and Wizard of Oz, right? I actually got to go see him in that production because we kind of went as a big family, a bunch of us in the office went to go see Lee's son doing Wizard of Oz. And this young college student fell in love with theater. And so I'm going to tell you a couple lessons during this presentation today. And lesson one is you have to find what you're truly passionate about. I say this in the honors program too, right? Find what you're passionate about. It's your passions that can become your big dreams, and if you're passionate enough, that's when you can make them come true. What did his passion become? Well, he loved acting so much, he decided not to transfer to the university with us. He was going to go to Hollywood. Did we support him? Did we tell him, hey, that's way cool. You're going to go be a big actor. We'll come support you. This is going to be great. No, we kind of actually laughed a little bit, right? Like, a Hollywood actor? Like, who actually has that as a legitimate dream that they're going to become a Hollywood actor? We were the naysayers. Lesson two, ignore your naysayers. So he moves to Hollywood. I moved to Albuquerque. I continued to keep in touch with the father. When I would come back home, I would visit with him. And about 2 years later, he told me that his son got cast, really big deal, in a commercial. It was very exciting. So he gets in a commercial, And his dad complains that, yeah, he's gonna make as much money as I make in a year with like 4 days of shooting for this little commercial. So the son does the commercial, and then he gets his next big gig, like just a year later. He gets cast in a movie called National Lampoon's Senior Trip.
Wow.
You remember that one? Okay, some people actually do. Some people maybe don't. It was a little bit of a flop, actually. He wasn't even a major part in the movie. But at that point, having a movie at all was a cool thing. But if he thought that success was going to unfold in a predictable fashion, you know, the small steps model, it didn't. Life had other plans. Just 4 years later, he was living by candlelight because he couldn't afford to pay his electric bill. And after 10 long years of mostly minor roles, he's continued to do theater acting because, again, he loved acting. And I did hear a side story that was through one of those theater gigs that one of the big name actors actually saw him. So this was well past 10 years of getting nothing, right? Just living by the crumbs, which is what we all expected to happen. And then he got his final big break. And he was cast in a movie called The Hurt Locker, which probably, again, not very many people know of it, but it was actually a critical success. He actually had an Oscar nomination for his role. It was about the Iraq War. So right after that, now finally, the roles start rolling in, and his next gig, boom, he gets cast as Hawkeye in Thor and then in the Avengers as the Marvel comic. And maybe even more surprisingly off of that, he's actually cast in Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise. So yeah, he had big dreams. There he is with his dad, Lee, just to show the photo likeness from everyone. And he made it despite the odds being not in his favor, despite the fact that he had many naysayers around him. So, how did he make it? I love this quote. This is kind of right up this alley. This is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan says, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to make the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Think about how many auditions that Jeremy Renner had to go to, and even through that 10-year lull of crap jobs, continued to go until he finally got cast. Those are some pretty big steps that he had to go. This next story is a little closer to my heart. This is about my daughter. So my daughter started her sport of equestrian vaulting in 2011. About 4 years later, 2 vaulters from her club that were about 5 years older than her qualified to go to the World Championships in Le Mans, France. We sat there and we watched it on the live feed television. These 2 girls that we knew from her very own barn that was actually going out to California and had trained all year in California, got to go to Le Mans. And they came in second to last. But we were so excited, we thought that they were so cool, right? They were amazing because they were from our area, from our club, and went to the World Championships. My daughter at that time decided that she could do that too. So fast forward, at the end of 2016, she got onto what's called a C team. It's the lowest level, it goes C, B, finally A. So she's on a little C team. She kind of fast forwarded onto this, she's the little flyer there. And they were pretty good. They did practices like 4 times a week. We had late nights on the bar on Fridays, did a little gymnastics, did some video watching, and they actually won their national championship. That actually was what then kind of spurred her forward. She was invited as, again, the small flyer on this squad to actually join a junior squad competing to qualify for the 2017 Junior World Championships. So that whole winter and into the next spring, they practiced and practiced. And then they took the show on the road to compete, to save money, because we don't have a lot of money. We ended up hauling the horses because we got them paid for the hauling. So my kids had to go. They did all the horse care. Once in a while, they would fly home after we would leave the horses, like in California. We traveled through 4 different states and to Canada. They got to go on their first international trip to Canada. And finally, they're competing that year. And they compete a couple times. After 5 competitions and 5 chances to win the points they needed to qualify, they came in 3rd. So they didn't qualify to go to the World Championships that year. They lost. And they were actually devastated in the moment. She watched the squad that did get to go, and I remember her actually having tears because she had thought she'd worked so hard at that point in time. But that's when my daughter decided she really wanted to go to the World Championship. So fast forward to 2019, and the core team members split off from their previous club and created a new club whose sole purpose was to try to get them to a World Championship. They found a new coach who was German, who luckily was in Colorado at that point in time. So this is my next lesson, is that luck does play a role sometimes, but you often have to make your own luck. So they went out and found this coach, like he was here, but we had to go and they had meetings with him, and he pulled the group together that wanted to be on this squad, and he made sure that they had what it was going to take to commit to this squad. So they start practicing, and they put together a new freestyle, and then it's spring, or not quite spring, it's like, March 2020, anybody remember March of 2020? They're ready to go to their first competition. We had our competition entries in for the first competition. We were ready to go. Everything shut down and they canceled the competition. And they canceled everything, right? So this was the first of their big setbacks, was that they had their whole season planned out. They were going to go to Ermelo, Netherlands, to go to an international competition. They were going to go to national championships that year, and we had to completely pivot and go a different direction. So that's lesson number 3, is that sometimes in the process of reaching these dreams, life will throw you kind of curveballs, and you have to pivot, you have to go with that, you have to be adaptable. So they pulled out of school to online only so that they wouldn't be exposed to COVID, because COVID at any time would shut you down for like weeks and you wouldn't be allowed to practice and you wouldn't be allowed to go if there were any competitions. We started doing Zoom dance and Zoom yoga and Zoom sports psychology. So this group of 8 girls would get together 5 times a week on horse, 6 to 7 times a week practicing, 20 hours a week of just conditioning. Finally, at the end of 2020, October 2020, they're allowed to go to their first competition. This one was a local one in Castle Rock. So it actually wasn't just the first competition here. This was the first vaulting competition of the entire year because of the COVID shutdowns. And so they're ready to go. It's great, right? Everything's going well. Well, not so much. And this little pointer's being weird, but see that? That's one of our primary vaulters. You'll get to see her again in a little bit. I don't know, you probably can't see that, but that's a little cast on her arm. 2 days before the competition, she does a really strange, fall off kind of the back of the horse, which doesn't happen a lot, but she lands with her arm like this and popped her elbow up. So she had to go to the ER, and we had to pull on an alternate, so they had to completely redo their freestyle for the very first competition of the year. We're like, oh my gosh, is this gonna be what everything's gonna be like? But they got through it, they did okay. They weren't actually competing against any other squads, because again, so many of the squads had been broken up that year. So then we start finally on our travel phase. This is the next spring. We start early, we start in February. And like in 2017, we do a lot of travel, except that this time we're doubling down, right? And so we traveled coast to coast. We started out in Tennessee, was our first competition. We also practiced in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. We came back over. We did 4 competitions in California, 2 in Utah, and 2 in Colorado. So we're practicing, getting to all these competitions. That was 8 airline trips in 5 months for those who were flying. Again, we drove the horses most of the time to save money. And this time, the squad was winning. In all those competitions, they were competing against 2 other squads out of California. And this group, with their German coach, the little bow tie there, they were winning everything. So they found out at the end of May that they had been selected as Team USA to go to the New World Championship. So the first dream is realized. But we have more obstacles, right? This is May 2021. Things are still a little rocky. We booked our flights to Europe when Germany was still closed down to US travels. Sweden was still closed down to US travelers. The Netherlands was still closed down to US travelers. The only one that was kind of open but kept changing their rules was France. But that's where the competition was. So we booked our ticket to France and then booked some secondary little legs on separate tickets, hoping we get to do what we want. We booked about a month in advance. And sure enough, because, I don't know, the world was shining on us right, our optimism worked, and we were able to get to all the places we were trying to go to. This is what it looked like. Our first flight to Paris actually flew us through Frankfurt because there was no directs to Paris. They almost stopped us there. The German passport control people didn't believe that Germany had really opened up to US citizens, even though we had all this paperwork that said they had. They almost didn't let us through, but we got to Paris, then we fly all the way up to Copenhagen because we want to get to Flinga, Sweden. That's going to be the first competition of the year in Europe of their whole international competitions because everything had been closed down. And we really, really needed to try out a horse because we had found out about 4 weeks before we left that the horse that we had booked for our competition that some of our vaulters had already tried out had died. It was a freak pasture. Yeah, seriously, these girls, I mean, they were like bawling. He died in a freak pasture accident. And he was the one we had declared as our partner, because again, some of the vaulters had been on him in previous years, some of the older vaulters than my daughter. And so now they have no horse out there, so they have to try out and find these horses. So we have to drive now from Copenhagen down to northern Germany, where luckily there was a barn up there that our German coach knew of. And so we tried out horses there, and then we had to come all the way back up to Flinga, Sweden to go to the competition. And from there, we have to go back to northern Germany to do, that's a train, to do 2 more weeks of practice, all the way back to Paris, through Frankfurt again, and then drive down to Le Mans, and then finally get to go home. So that's what the path looked like. If you're tracking, that is 10 international border crossings that we went through on planes, trains, and automobiles. It included that we missed 2 of our flights, both the Frankfurt first leg because the passport control guy like holding us up for so long, also our Chicago flight back to Denver. We almost missed the train in Copenhagen. They held it for 15 minutes for us because we were lost at the train station. It was like a classic. And then finally we find the train that's on a whole different platform. I totally felt like it was platform, what is it, 6 1/4?
9 3/4.
Yeah, thank you. It was like that, right? It was like totally didn't exist where we were at. We had to go totally up to a whole different place. Then we had to walk through the train, from the back of the train, through all of the people that had been waiting there for 15 extra minutes for us to find the train. We had to walk through all of them because our seats were like at the second to last car. It's terrible. So one of our rental cars got in a car accident, not mine luckily, and one of the trains was delayed by hours. That was our travel. But here we go, we did make it. So, and we got to try out horses, but it's not quite as, we got to do some practices there, but it wasn't even quite as smooth as you would think at this point. Because guess what, that German coach I talked about, he couldn't get there with us. We had to leave him behind. Even a week before we left, we were on the phone with an immigration lawyer to try to see if we can get him there because his visa had expired, of course, in 2021. All visa offices are shut down. It's like emergency only, and they're putting out there that it will take you 999 days to get an appointment. He couldn't get a visa. Our other coach, we had 2 coaches. Our second coach was our artistic coach. She couldn't get a passport for her 1-year-old daughter. She wasn't gonna leave her 1-year-old daughter behind. That all the passport offices in the US were shut down. She finally did get that passport, but it was 4 days after our first competition there. That's the Flinga competition. Also, many people said we'd never be able to get into Sweden because Sweden was still closed down to the US, but we were optimistic. We had letters from everybody saying why we were going there. We had letters from the competition organizers, and they actually did let us in, even though it was mostly closed to US travelers. We were stopped at every single border, all of those border crossings you saw. We were stopped every time. If you've ever driven in Europe, usually you just drive right across. We had to be stopped every time, show our paperwork, often showing COVID paperwork. It's pretty crazy. So we made it, we finally made it to the Flinga competition. We had to hire a separate coach out there. So we have our separate coach, and we win. So again, this is another one of those lessons. Sometimes when things are thrown your way, it actually works out well. like it was just the right thing to hire this other coach that took us along for about 10 days there, getting us ready in Sweden, because she didn't know us just enough that all the girls were like really paying attention. She was a past world champion herself. So sometimes it works out. And our coach finally arrives. Yay, that's one of our coaches on that side, and then we actually ended up bringing out a second one to help her out because she was bringing the 1-year-old daughter. And we're like, yay, finally, things are gonna get better. Except that she got sick, her daughter got sick, our top vaulter got sick, so sick she went to the ER once and the doctors twice. And so they spent about 2 weeks when they were supposed to be doing heavy duty practicing with everybody pretty darn run down. Luckily, our other coach has some chiropractic, massage therapy, some physical therapy, and was able to help them out. So eventually, we finally make it to Le Mans. This is the photo of us in front of the Cathedral in Le Mans after our next 2 legs of travel. So we make it to Le Mans, and that horse that we had vaulted on at Flinga had done such a nice job. That was definitely a world championship horse. So again, even though the other horse had had the tragic accident, we found a spectacular horse to backfill him. So we're excited. We finally get to the arena, and of all things nostalgia, this is the arena that those 2 girls from our squad back in 2015, this is the same location that they vaulted at. So we go in, we get our 10 minutes, they get 10 minutes, 2 days before the competition starts, to do warm-up. And things are going well. There's a photo I took. Things are going okay. I didn't get a photo of the next thing that happens. They're trying out what they call triples. Anybody's done some cheerleading or anything like that where they put a flyer up, right? And it has the biggest crash that they had had in like 2 years. The flyer came all the way down from a high position, which they'd never done with her. She's a 10-year-old girl, and it crashed hard. So at that moment, we're sitting there, and we're wondering, will the flyer go back up again? Will she be too afraid? Will the base that was holding her, who kind of hit her back, will she be okay, right? This is 2 days before the competition, after all of those years of time, and here we are wondering. But luckily, our coaches pulled it together and got the girls back together, and they finally get to compete and do their compulsories. They were 3rd place after compulsories coming into the freestyle, and here they are after their freestyle. I'm going to show you a little piece of this. jump through some of that. So that was 5 years in the making, 3,000 hours, just over 3,000 hours over the past 2 years. Homework in the car, late nights at the barn, temps as low as -10, as high as 105, 106, approximately 12,000 miles driven for hauling the horses. And then, of course, the travel across Europe, having to find a new horse, having none of our regular coaches at the beginning. Any number of things could have stopped them. Several almost did. But they continued, this group continued to fight for their dream because they had held it for so long. They were through, around, under, over, between all the obstacles, through all the doubts. After all of that, the squad actually won silver medal. It's the highest placing junior squad that the US has ever had. And the only US vaulters to win medals at the competition. And they podiumed only 0.2 of a point behind the Germans. The Germans always win. Every year the Germans win. One of these years, right? So our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time. That's Thomas Edison. So just to leave you with a few thoughts, I did start this a couple weeks ago after Penali really asked me again. I finally said yes, started to develop this idea. And then of course things in the world have changed a little bit, right? Over the last couple of weeks, you keep hearing the news, devastating news coming around the world. And I thought to myself, is this really important, right? People going to a world championship, people reaching their dreams of becoming an actor. This is what's important. And then I remembered the concept, the theory of self-actualization. And what that means is that for you to be able to be your best self, you have to find yourself. You have to find that thing that drives you, and then you will be able to do great things. So it does bring me to my favorite quote. I'm going to get through these, but skipping those. The more important thing, my favorite quote, which basically says that doing small things, doing whatever it is in your capacity, these are the things that are going to make the world a better place. And if you self-actualize, then you can become someone who can help with the world. Thank you.